inside the SCIF.
So I thought the next case we would talk about is the Betty Andreasson case. Like you said before, there seems to be a lot of Bettys involved in UFO encounters for some reason.
Right.
But anyway, on the evening of January 25th in 1967, around 6:30 in the evening, in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. I don't know why they have to have such long names in Massachusetts.
Hey, I used to live there. Chill out.
So anyway, Betty Andreasson was working in her kitchen when the power in her house went out for a second. It went off and immediately came back on. She rushed to the front room because the children were playing in the other room. So she rushed into the room to make sure her 7 children were okay.
7 children?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that was at the time, I guess, the big families, right?
And her father saw a pulsating red light shining through the kitchen window. So he went to the window to figure out what is this light that's flashing outside. And he saw 5 small, what he described as aliens, hopping towards the house. They weren't walking, they weren't floating. They were hopping like rabbits towards the house.
Or kangaroos.
Or kangaroos, yes.
From Massachusetts. Okay. Now
so, so how he described the aliens were that they had pear-shaped heads. They had wraparound cat-like eyes. Their ears and nose were small, and their mouth was just a slit. They were wearing blue overalls with a belt, an orange belt, and a bird insignia on the sleeves of their uniform. And they also wore what looked like heavy boots. When they got to the house, the aliens seemed to float through the kitchen door.
Oh, they came in.
They came in. Right. So somehow their molecules came through the kitchen door, and all of a sudden they were inside, but they were floating at this point. They weren't hopping anymore.
Wow.
And instantly, all her family, her entire family, were frozen like they were in suspended animation or something.
Wow.
And it kind of, scared her because she was the only one that could move to show her that she was not in danger.
Okay.
They allowed her daughter to come out of suspended animation and to tell her mother, her daughter Becky, who was 11 years old, was unsuspended for a second, and she told her mother everything's going to be okay. And then she froze again.
That's really weird and really strange.
Yeah. While the rest of her family was frozen, it seemed, or suspended animation, whatever it was, these aliens were somehow able to communicate with her telepathically. They weren't talking, but she heard their voices in her head. And then they led her outside the house, out in the yard, and there was a 20-foot diameter silver spacecraft. One really kind of funny and interesting thing that she said was one of these aliens stayed with her family to babysit them, to watch them, to make sure nothing happened to them while she went with the rest of them.
Yeah, I find this strange.
Very strange. Or they were guarding them, so I don't know.
I mean, it could be people being drugged and
I don't. Or they needed that alien there to have that mental connection with everyone to keep them in that state. That's a possibility, I suppose. Once they led her out to this spacecraft, they took her on board.
Oh, they took her in.
And then as soon as she was inside, the spacecraft took off. And they flew up into a mothership over a 4-hour period.
It was just her.
Just her. Over a 4-hour period, she was subjected to medical experiments and a surgery where they removed a tracking device that had been implanted in her nose in the 1950s. according to her, this wasn't the first time she was abducted, is what I'm trying to say.
Wow.
They had implanted this in the 50s. Now it's 1967. They're taking it out.
17 years later, yeah.
Okay? A very bizarre thing that they told her was that they worship Jesus Christ.
The aliens said that?
Yes.
I mean, whoever?
Yes, that they
Yeah,
believe in the Bible stories.
Yeah,
and
why Jesus was not Buddha, was not Muhammad? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe she was a Christian or a Catholic,
Yeah,
and
whoever-
it was their way of communicating
Right.
to her that everything's okay.
yeah, it's for
it's-
comfort. It might be
Maybe. It's just
Whoever-
very,
yeah.
very bizarre, though. you know?
whoever said that. It was probably for their comfort.
Yeah. So she said she was taken into a room where she talked to a very tall being that she calls the One.
The one.
The One.
With
And she
Jet
said
Li.
after a meeting with this being that she was taken home, and this is 4 hours later, and now it's 10:30 at night, by only
wow.
2 of the extraterrestrials took her home.
Mm-hmm.
The spaceship landed, walked her back to the house, and then wiped her memory.
Hold on.
Yeah.
The thing is, when they say wipe her memory, but how does she remember all this?
We're going to get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Her family at that time was unfrozen or taken out of suspended animation. And besides, as you asked before, like who remembers this?
Mm-hmm.
Betty and her daughter Becky.
Becky.
You know, later the father remembered some of the details, but Betty and her daughter Becky were the only ones that remembered most of what had happened. And then early in the 1970s, she started having dreams and started having these flashbacks,
Yeah.
these memories, right? That she couldn't, you know, like, where the heck is this coming from? So in 1975, she wrote a letter to Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
The guy of the time. I mean, still.
Right. So she must have heard about him from some other cases.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of people contacted him in particular when they had some kind of story to tell.
No, I'm sure, yeah.
But when he heard their story, he thought it was so far-fetched that,
Yeah, it does sound.
you know,
I mean,
it just sounds,
the
you know, with
suspended
the
people, the going through the door of the kitchen.
going,
yeah.
right, the molecules going through the door of the kitchen and
In
materializing.
abduction, yeah, the
the
abduction.
the Bible reference,
Right.
You know, and it just seems too far-fetched
Yeah.
for. So he didn't have much
Too
interest.
good to be true.
Exactly, he didn't
Yeah.
have a lot of interest in this case. But in 1977, a group of investigators who did listen to her story, they were able to gather some funds
Okay.
and set up a dozen hypnotic regression sessions and some physical testing
Okay.
on her body.
Yeah, regression hypnosis can work pretty well. Yeah.
Exactly. So Betty and her daughter Becky, they were able to recall most of the encounter without
The regression.
regression
hypnosis,
at this time.
hypnosis, yeah.
Betty started remembering previous abductions that she had had. One in 1944,
Wow.
one in 1949, and another one in 1950. And the hypnotist, who was
How old was she at the time? I'm just trying to figure out her first abduction. I mean, supposedly, so first abduction in 44. How old she was?
we would
Because
have
we
to,
don't know.
I would have to look that up because
It's okay.
I don't
I'm
know
just
her
curious.
age at those times.
She's a mother. Yeah.
But the hypnotist who worked on this case was named Raymond E. Fowler. And after he regressed her, he started thinking that he too had been abducted.
Oh.
And
So it opened a Pandora's box, basically.
right, it opened up his floodgates,
Yeah.
right? But an interesting thing to note, however, is that Raymond Fowler
Mm-hmm.
at one time served as the director of scientific investigation for MUFON.
Move? Oh.
He was the head of scientific
Really?
investigations. Also, he authored an older edition of the MUFON Field Investigators Manual.
Oh, wow.
So he wrote the manual on how to do investigations. Also, he served as a scientific associate and associate member of the Center for UFO Studies, which was the organization that J. Allen Hynek started after Project Blue Book. During Project Blue Book, in the beginning, he didn't think there was much to this. He was like most other scientists. Oh, it's a natural phenomenon. They saw a meteor, and somebody misidentified an aircraft or something. But after doing all of these 17 years of investigating, the Lonnie Zamora case, for example, Betty and Barney Hill, some of these other cases, made him start to question what his scientific reasoning was behind this phenomenon. Like something's happening that can't be explained.
Right.
In normal scientific terms, something is going on. There's a true phenomenon. So once Project Blue Book ended, his mind had totally flipped to the other direction. Like there's something going on. We have to figure out what this is. The government doesn't want to do it. We're going to do it.
Right.
So he started the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois. And as I said before, Raymond Fowler was a scientific associate and an associate member. Okay? And also, he was chairman at one time of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, which is one of the oldest investigative. Fowler, Raymond E. Fowler, he took the notes from Betty's hypnosis sessions and he turned it into a book called The Andreasson Affair.
The famous book too, I think.
Yeah.
Never heard about it.
By the time that the case was actually publicized, she had already been divorced. But what I'm trying to say is she is divorced by the time this becomes public.
Gotcha.
Okay? And she's living in Florida with 2 of her daughters.
So
okay,
Becky,
only 2. She had 7 children, only 2 daughters.
Oh, that's right.
All right? So while living in Florida, she met a man named Bob Luca.
Okay.
And he also claimed that he was abducted by UFOs.
Well, that's Florida, though.
And they ended up getting married.
Good for them.
A match made in heaven.
Yeah.
Right? Or in outer space.
In outer space. Encapsulated.
Maybe they met each other in an abduction. We don't know, right?
Or the convention.
They're both still alive, and they're both still very active in the UFO community. Many of the people believe her story, but there have been inconsistencies over time. For example, she first described the aliens' eyes as being white with dark pupils. And then later she said the eyes were completely black. She also stated that they wore heavy boots. Now this seems very strange, especially since they floated.
Right.
What did they need these heavy boots?
For gravity boots or something?
Maybe they were gravity boots. Who knows?
That sounds kind of a cheesy sci-fi, though.
Yeah. So Betty and Bob Luca, because she got married, Betty Andreasson Luca became Andreasson Luca. They had a son together named Robert Jr. And in February of 2007, he stated that the Andreasson affair was a hoax. So the son of them, of the two,
says them under the bus.
Publicly says this whole thing was a hoax, that his parents are perpetrating this hoax to sell books and to make money.
Like many people have done also.
So Bob Luca claims that his son is estranged from the family and that he has drug and alcohol problems. But he's now deceased.
The son?
Yeah, the son is now deceased. So we don't know what he actually knew, whether it was true or not. But the Andreasson affair became one of the best documented cases of its kind. It was the subject of a 12-month investigation conducted by the Center of UFO Studies. J. Allen
Hynek.
Hynek. Right,
Yeah,
right.
wow.
And at first he wasn't interested until Raymond Fowler became interested in this case and started doing these regressions.
Right.
And he had some credibility because of some of the other investigative organizations he'd worked for, and eventually became the scientific advisor for CUFOs.
Yeah, could have she been faking those regressions?
Sure.
Right. I mean,
Sure. Or if someone believes that this actually happened to them it would be real.
it would be, yeah.
And when they explained it to other people, it would seem like they're telling the truth. Another fact that I do want to mention is, as I said before, her and her husband, Bob Lucas, went under many regressive sessions, and there's recordings and notes of these sessions. They also both took extensive lie detector tests and passed them. There's been a detailed analysis that corroborates the circumstantial evidence of what's happened to them. And there's been a lot of comparison to other abduction cases that kind of line up together.
Okay.
You know, some of the details line up.
Line up.
Right, right.
And that's all during under hypnosis.
Well, like I said before, her and her daughter
Right.
remembered a lot of it, but under hypnosis, her and her new husband started
At similarities in
right, and Fowler wrote 4 more books based on their experiences.
How convenient.
Yeah, so that's the Sun said they're just trying to make
Right.
money from.
I just
from
want to know what
putting out these
the
books.
son died of. I'm just curious.
We'll have to look that up.